because it's totally different now, because he ran the football club from top to bottom. He'd watch all the trials. He'd try and watch youth team games at home, because we used to play outside Portman Road. It's where the academies are now.
Alan Brazil has never been the type to bite his tongue. Decades on TalkSport, sitting behind that microphone every morning, he's built a reputation on saying the thing everyone else is thinking but won't put into words. He played at the top level himself, Ipswich, Tottenham, Scotland, so when he speaks about footballers, it's not just opinion, it carries weight. I am Oliver, and this is Sport Icons. And that's exactly what makes this list so striking, because Brazil doesn't lose respect easily. He knows how hard the game is. He knows the pressure, the sacrifice, the physical and mental cost of staying at the top. So when he looks at certain players and says the respect is gone, it means something different than when your average pundit takes a shot. These weren't journeymen. These weren't players who fell short because they lacked ability. Every single name on this list had everything going for them. The talent, the platform, the opportunity. 7 players, 7 stories, 7 moments where the gap between what they could have been and what they chose to be became impossible to ignore. Let's get into it. Start with the boy from Croxteth, 16 years old, playing for Everton and already doing things that made defenders look foolish. When Wayne Rooney burst onto the scene, the feeling across English football was unanimous. This kid was going to be something special. Not good, not very good. Special in the rarest sense of the word. Brazil was one of the believers, and why wouldn't he be? The raw hunger was visible from the first time Rooney touched the ball in a professional match. He didn't play like a teenager, he played like someone with a point to prove, like someone who'd been waiting his whole life to show what he could do. That kind of fire is either in you or it isn't, and Rooney had it burning. The move to Manchester United in 2004 only accelerated the story. Rooney became one of the best players in the world during his peak years at Old Trafford. Champions League nights, Premier League titles, and FA Cup. The goals kept coming, the assists kept coming, and for a long stretch it genuinely felt like he was delivering on every bit of that early promise. But then the cracks appeared. Not on the pitch at first, off it. The controversies crept in, the weight fluctuations, the stories that made you question what was happening behind the scenes. Brazil's concern wasn't scandal for scandal's sake. It was the sense that Rooney wasn't protecting what he had, that the standards required to stay at the very top weren't always being upheld. And as the years rolled on, the question on the pitch became harder to ignore too. Rooney dropped deeper and deeper at United, further from goal, further from the role that defined him. Some saw it as tactical evolution. Brazil saw it differently. A player finding a place to hide, coasting on a reputation that the performances no longer justified. The goals dried up. The urgency faded. He finished as England's all-time top scorer. That fact will never be taken away. But Brazil's disappointment wasn't about the numbers at the end. It was about the feeling that Rooney, with his gifts, should have been even more than that. The later years told a quieter story. DC United, Derby County, a management career that never caught fire. A boy who'd once set English football alight, drifting through the final chapters without urgency. The gap between the ceiling he had and the height he reached, that's where the respect quietly slipped away. If Rooney's story is one of gradual disappointment, Ronaldo's is something altogether more dramatic. Because Ronaldo didn't just have ability, he had the greatest career of any outfield player in the history of the sport by almost any measure you want to use. 5 Ballon d'Ors, records at United, Real Madrid, Juventus, Portugal. A relentless, almost inhuman commitment to self-improvement that Brazil openly admired for years. Peak Ronaldo earned every bit of praise he got. The work ethic was real. The sacrifice was real. Brazil respected him enormously for that. Here was someone who understood exactly what it took to be the best and refused to accept anything less from himself. So what changed? The second Manchester United spell. The Piers Morgan interview in November 2022, where Ronaldo publicly torched the club, its infrastructure, and its manager. The stories of training ground complaints. The sense that his return to Old Trafford was never about Manchester United's project. It was about Cristiano Ronaldo's legacy, and those two things were pulling in completely opposite directions. The moment Brazil kept coming back to on air was a specific one. October 2022 against Tottenham. Ronaldo was asked to come on as a substitute. He refused. Then he left the ground before the final whistle. For Brazil, someone who played the game and understands what it means to pull on a shirt, that wasn't just poor behavior, that was a betrayal of the badge. Greatness doesn't give you the right to undermine everyone around you. Brazil said it plainly, and he was right. What made it worse was the context. United were struggling. The squad needed pulling together, and the one player with enough stature to set the tone instead chose to make himself the story. The Piers Morgan interview followed weeks later, and whatever your feelings about that particular platform, the content was damning. Ronaldo called out Erik ten Hag by name. He questioned whether the club had moved forward in the decades since Sir Alex Ferguson left. He said he felt provoked, felt betrayed, felt let down. Maybe some of it was true, but Brazil's point on air was simple. You don't burn it down on your way out the door. That's not the behavior of someone who cares about the badge. That's the behavior of someone protecting their own image at the expense of everyone still in the building. The contract was terminated by mutual agreement in November 2022. Ronaldo left without the send-off his playing career deserved because he made sure it ended that way. The Ronaldo situation was loud. Everyone could see it. The ego was on display for the whole world to watch, and at least you knew what you were dealing with. Paul Pogba's story is different, and in some ways that makes it harder to sit with. Because Pogba's failure wasn't obvious, it crept up slowly, masked by occasional moments of genuine brilliance that kept convincing you the real version was just around the corner. Cast your mind back to the summer of 2016. Manchester United paid £89 million to bring him back from Juventus, a world record at the time. The hype was stratospheric, and on paper, you understood it completely. Pogba had everything a top-level midfielder could possibly need. The frame, the technique, the range of passing, the ability to drive past people in tight spaces. Brazil looked at him and saw a player who should have been dominating English football for the next decade. For a while, in flashes, he was. There were games where Pogba looked genuinely unplayable, where you could see exactly why United spent that kind of money. The problem was what came in between those games. Weeks of invisibility. Performances where he drifted through 90 minutes without leaving a mark. And the more that pattern repeated itself, the harder it became to explain away. Around him, the circus never stopped. His agent, Mino Raiola, seemed to spend more time briefing journalists about transfer moves than anyone was spending actually developing Pogba as a player. Contract sagas dragged on for months. Speculation about his future became a permanent background noise at Old Trafford, and every time things went quiet on that front, another story surfaced. Brazil's frustration wasn't just about the inconsistency on the pitch, it was about the broader picture, a player who seemed more invested in building a brand than in fighting for results on a wet Tuesday night at Old Trafford. The social media posts, the sponsorship deals, the image, all of it pointing in a direction that had very little to do with football. Then came 2023, a 4-year doping ban issued by Italian authorities, later reduced to 18 months on appeal. Whatever you make of the legal specifics, the damage to Pogba's legacy was permanent. This wasn't the ending anyone envisioned for a player of his ability. Brazil's verdict was blunt and fair. This was talent wasted, not through bad luck or injury, but through a consistent failure to treat the gift with the seriousness it deserved. By the time the ban came down, Pogba hadn't played a competitive match in almost a year. Injuries had kept him out for long stretches at Juventus after his second move there in 2022. His fitness had been a recurring issue throughout his career, and Brazil's frustration with that was real. Not because injuries are avoidable, but because the lifestyle questions never went away. The circus surrounding him never slowed. His brother Matthias made headlines for all the wrong reasons. Raiola was gone, but the noise wasn't. Pogba was 30 years old and already looked like a chapter the sport had moved on from. Some players reach the end of their careers and you think they gave everything. With Pogba, the feeling Brazil was left with was the opposite, that the best version of him was always just out of reach. And that's a particular kind of regret. Pogba at least had moments that justified the price tag. What makes Raheem Sterling and Jack Grealish so frustrating to Brazil is that both men had something rarer than talent. They had momentum. They'd already proved themselves before the big moves came, and then, somehow, they couldn't hold on to it. Sterling built his reputation properly. Liverpool Academy, sharp development under Brendan Rodgers, then a move to City in 2015, where Guardiola turned him him into a consistent 20-goal-a-season threat. For a stretch, Sterling was one of the most dangerous wide players in the country. The pace, the movement off the ball, the ability to find pockets of space in tight defensive shapes, it was all there. Brazil had no issues with the player he was at his peak, but the move to Chelsea in 2022 exposed something. Under Tuchel, then Potter, then Graham Potter's replacement, Sterling's performances became impossible to predict. Games where he barely touched the ball, big moments, knockout stages, pressure matches where he simply didn't deliver. Brazil's criticism wasn't personal, it was the pattern. When the lights were brightest, Sterling found ways to disappear. And for a player who'd had every advantage, great coaching, great teammates, maximum exposure, that pattern felt like a character issue more than a technical one. Grealish is a sharper kind of disappointment. At Aston Villa, he was everything. The captain, the heartbeat, the man the whole team ran through. Creative, brave, willing to take the ball in dangerous areas under pressure. When City paid £100 million for him in 2021, it looked like the natural next step for English football's most exciting talent. What followed was hard to watch. Grealish couldn't nail down a starting spot at the Etihad. His output dropped. The directness that defined him at Villa seemed to get coached out of him. Or maybe the system just didn't suit what he offered. The question of whether he was ever truly a Guardiola player became impossible to ignore. And off the pitch, the noise never helped. The tabloid stories, the nights out, the constant low-level drama that surrounds players who attract that kind of attention. Brazil's position was clear. A player of Grealish's ability can't afford those distractions. Not at that level. Not with that price tag. Not when Guardiola needs commitment every single day. Neither Sterling nor Grealish ever produced that one defining international moment that ended the debate. The Euros, the World Cup, the knockout nights when England needed someone to step forward. Both men were there. Both men had the platform, and neither delivered when it mattered. For Brazil, that's the sharpest part of it. You can forgive a player who doesn't get the chance. You can't forgive one who gets it repeatedly and still comes up short. Both of them had the talent to be remembered differently. The occasion was there, they just never rose to meet it. Sterling and Grealish disappointed because they couldn't sustain the level. Harry Maguire never even got close to it at United, and the fall, when it came, was one of the most public unravelings in modern English football. The early chapters of Maguire's story are worth remembering because they matter. He came up through Sheffield United, earned his move to Leicester, and at the King Power, he looked like exactly the kind of defender England had been waiting for. Commanding in the air, composed on the ball, a leader who wore the armband like he understood what it meant. Brazil respected that version of Maguire completely. There was nothing manufactured about it. Then United paid £80 million for him in 2019, the most ever spent on a defender, and something shifted. The mistakes started multiplying. Positioning errors in big games, moments of hesitation that cost goals. The gap between his price tag and his performances became the story every single week, and Maguire wore the weight of it visibly. He stopped looking like a captain and started looking like a man drowning in expectation. The Greece situation in 2020, the arrest, the conviction, the eventual appeal, added a different layer. Brazil wasn't interested in piling on about that, but what he couldn't ignore was the pitch. A captain who goes missing under pressure isn't a captain at all. And Gareth Southgate kept picking Maguire for England regardless, even when he wasn't playing regularly for his club. Brazil said on air what a lot of people felt privately. That selection made no sense, and it was doing Maguire no favours. The loan to West Ham in 2024 was the quiet ending that his United career deserved. Not dramatic, just finished. If Maguire's story is hard to watch, Rashford's is harder, because Rashford's ceiling was genuinely higher. A boy from Wythenshawe who broke into the United first team at 18 and scored on his debut against Arsenal. That debut wasn't a fluke, it was a statement. Quick, direct, fearless, with an instinct for goal that you simply can't teach. Brazil loved everything about that player. And then in 2020 came the free school meals campaign. Rashford took on the government and won, forced a policy reversal, made national headlines for something that had nothing to do with football. That moment earned him a level of genuine public respect that most footballers never reach. Brazil wasn't shy about acknowledging it. Here was a young man using his platform for something real. The crash that followed makes all of it worse. 30 goals in 2022-23, a season that looked like the fulfillment of everything he'd promised. Then, nothing. The form vanished. The sharpness disappeared. Training ground stories started filtering out. The birthday party headlines, the late nights, the sense that somewhere between the highs and the next chapter, Rashford had stopped fighting for it. The 2023-24 season told the full story. 8 goals all season. Dropped by Ruben Amorim in the winter, told publicly he wasn't in the plans. When a manager tells you that, at 26, with your ability, it's not a tactical decision, it's a verdict on where your head is. Brazil said on air what was hard to argue with. Rashford had all the tools to be United's best player for the next 5 years, and instead, the club was looking for a way to move him on. That's not a football failure, that's a personal one. This wasn't injury, it wasn't bad luck. Brazil's frustration was specific, and it was earned. You don't get to have that talent, that story, that platform, and then stop caring about it. The January 2025 loan to Aston Villa came without ceremony. No farewell, no explanation, just a quiet exit from the club that gave him everything. Brazil doesn't lose respect over one bad season. It takes a pattern. With Rashford, the pattern was clear, and it's the saddest kind, because nothing external stopped him. He stopped himself. 7 players, 7 stories. Not one of them lacked ability. What they lacked, in Brazil's eyes, was the daily commitment that turns talent into something permanent. Football gives you everything. Money, fame, a stage most people will never stand on, but it demands everything in return. Alan Brazil played the game. He knows what it costs, and when players with every advantage still come up short, that's when the respect goes. Which of these 7 hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, subscribe. There's a lot more to come.